Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, you who are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I think you can put yourself in the same place as this psalmist. The psalmist appears to be outside at night. The sky is clear, and there are a multitude of stars. So think back to the last time you were outside doing some stargazing. Maybe it was dark enough that you saw the Milky Way. Maybe you identified the Big Dipper, maybe even the Small Dipper, and could follow that to the North Star. And as often happens when we look at the vast expanse of the cosmos, the psalmist began to ask that question: what are human beings? How do we measure up to the scope of all of creation? Who in the world are we? And why did God create us? Who are we that God thinks anything of us? You had such a moment, stargazing, maybe looking at the redwood trees and kind of saying, man, humanity's kind of small in the big picture of things. But then the psalmist thinks about God creating each human being and says, and yet God has created us, named us, blessed us, and said we are just a little lower than the angels and have been crowned with glory and honor. And you can almost see the temptation there to get a little puffed up. Well, you know, God did create us, blessed us, said we're created in God's image, and has given us that difficult word, dominion, over all creation, over the earth, over the creatures, over everything. And it's easy at that point to get really puffed up. We're important people. We've got important things to do, important things to say. We're just a little lower than the angels. Now, I have to admit, after being at General Conference for 2 weeks, I think I saw more of the latter. People kind of puffing themselves up, thinking their word was the gospel, their word was all truth, that they had important things to do, important things to say, that they could control anything that the United Methodist Church needed to do in the days and years ahead. There was probably a few puffed up people there, not Jan. Present company excluded. but others. But in the midst of all of that, 2 of our bishops talked about humility. In the Episcopal address, Bishop Gregory Palmer said that when he was asked to do the Episcopacy address, which is about a 45-minute address, some of the first words that are spoken at General Conference, he spent the first 10 minutes talking about humility. How when he was asked to do that, he realized he needed to come from a place of humility, to realize that he wasn't to be puffed up or to think he had the corner on all truth and all words to be spoken, but an attitude of humility. And on the last day, Bishop Elaine Stanovsky picked up on the exact same theme. She even had the members of General Conference stand and to bow themselves down. That recognition that our lives of service and our lives of faith are not about thinking too highly of ourselves, that we are crowned necessarily for glory, but that instead perhaps we're crowned for service. Perhaps we're crowned to make a difference in people's lives. Because there's no doubt that the stories that come out of General Conference, the ones that are the best, are the ones about how we come together and make a difference in other people's lives. We've talked a lot about that story with Imagine No Malaria, that we make our best difference when we reach out to our neighbor in love. There was a small story that probably kind of got buried in the midst of all the headlines of a group of people one day that decided they didn't need to be around the General Conference plenary, that they needed to take a break from the perhaps puffed up speeches, you might say, and decided that they would spend their time in service. And we're going to hear just a little bit about their day of service. And please notice the different places that these voices come from.
As thousands of United Methodists inside the Portland Convention Center were in General Conference sessions, some took a chance to travel to another area of the city and be in service.
The bulk food, I'll just keep replacing it from down there. I'll keep putting it down at this end.
Is that one more than a pound?
Volunteers visited Bethlehem House of Bread, a ministry of Tigard United Methodist. The shopping-style food bank provides emergency food supplies for 110 families each month. Outreach includes a partnership with a nearby school and a community garden where neighbors can grow their own vegetables. The ministry grew out of a merger of two churches.
And so our church, Tigard UMC, really took a risk in taking on this property and this building and repurposing it for ministry in this way, but it's been such a blessing to us. And it's really one of the primary ways that we're connecting with the community around us.
Ruby Anderson is an active volunteer from the Detroit Conference. She signed on to learn best practices for better ministry in her own church.
And we get most of our food from Oregon Food Bank, although we do have a lot of food drives and businesses.
I want to be sure that I'm doing something that not only helps me to learn, and I'm always looking for things that I can take back to my church, to the groups that I work with, because I think we are each ambassadors of knowing what to do and not just doing for the sake of doing.
Some of the participants packed items at the Portland Food Bank. All were thankful for a chance to shift their focus some from meetings to ministry.
We are working now with Apple. It's important because we are Christian, and it doesn't mean only faith, but it means only our service, our ministry with the poor and among the people.
I don't think all the work of the United Methodist Church is happening in General Conference. It's in the votes and the legislation. It's what we can do to make a difference in our community. So I want to remind myself about why I'm United Methodist, of doing good and making a difference in the world.
To my fellow United Methodist Church members, do this also as Jesus did in our lives.
A little lower than the angels, crowned for glory, given dominion, really means we're crowned to be servants. Servants of one another, servants for the care of creation, servants for our brothers and sisters in need. I can't think of a better way to spend the Sunday after General Conference than saying we're having a Sunday of service, bringing together our faith and our actions. So today, may we be crowned for service. Amen.